Hi, Juha. Thank you for taking the time for this interview. And how are you today?
Hello, good morning. I'm fine. It's spring coming here. No snow anymore.
Good, good. Good to hear. Here, the weather is a bit crazy now, but climate change, I guess. Uh,
Yeah,
okay, can you start telling us something about you and what you do?
yeah, sure. I work for a company called Metacase, which builds tools and languages for customers. And I have been originally a consultant here, then member of the board, and currently I'm the managing director here. And what we basically do is, what my work is largely is assisting customers to build their languages, usually in the early steps, but in some cases we do the full solution
Mhm.
uh, for customers. But in main cases, customers do everything by themselves. We hopefully can assist them in certain places.
Uh,
And this is something what I have been done also at my university times. So the whole company is basically founded from the university research by 10 people. And that's how we basically get started. So this is something that I have been doing almost my, my whole adult time.
Good, good. So you have a lot of experience to share, and so I'm happy that we can share a little bit of it today. And okay, so you have a lot of experience building domain-specific languages, and so I was wondering, what are, in your opinion, the main advantages of DSLs?
The main advantage what we basically see immediately is the improved speed. There is also the quality aspect, but it is not so immediately visible. People realize that we don't need to maintain multiple files and keep them consistent. If they're all generated, they're always consistent, or they are similar errors always everywhere. So that kind of things are immediately coming out. But usually the speed is the easiest to detect, and sometimes some companies measure it, but often it is something that someone concludes in a meeting that I did in this afternoon something that took earlier whole week.
Huh.
And then it's no need to discuss. But sometimes companies do measure it. They even make a empirical setup.
Mhm.
And then sometimes one company once mentioned the management that they have invested in this, and then now they collect data for 5 years
Okay.
to see how it has been doing. And of course, later we contacted them and asked that, look, do you have the data? And then they said that, well, no, we stopped it after 1 year to collect data because it's no reason to collect the data because it's so clear that there is a good development speed and to market. So
Yeah, yeah. I guess when the speed is 10 times faster instead of 10% faster, it doesn't. It's really obvious. Yeah.
indeed.
Okay, and we know that there are different ways to build DSLs, and it's possible to build graphical, textual DSLs, or to use tables in DSLs. So I was wondering, what is your opinion about using these different approaches? When it's better to use graphical DSLs, and when it's better to use instead a textual one?
Yes. Um, well, we see multiple kind of representations also other than text or graphical. And basically, it should come always from the problem domain itself. And not from the personal preferences or what the tool can do
Right.
ideally. So if we have, let's say, a metro map, I guess it should be some kind of graphical diagram or sort of. But if it is a timetable of the metro, then most likely the matrix kind of columns is the suitable one. So it really should come always from what people think that the problem domain itself has. And what we basically experience most is the graphical domain-specific languages, or they are often diagrammatic. But with the tooling that we provide, the same diagram can be also visualized as a matrix or as a table. So we don't really matter so much that it's only the diagram. But quite often the problems are such that they tend to be graphical diagrams in our case.
Okay. And okay, so your company produce and sell this language workbench called MetaEdit Plus, right? And I was wondering if you are familiar with other language workbenches, or do you find other language workbenches interesting in this field?
Yes, indeed. Few years ago, I had a possibility to give a keynote in a conference, and I collected there maybe 50 different kind of language workbenches into a family of language workbenches. So we have been collecting that information partly for research many years ago, but just to follow up what's going on. Most of these language workbenches don't anymore exist, and many of them are research environment to study languages and their creation. But for us, maybe the tools like QuickSpec is something that has a big influence to us in terms of how languages are defined, and also naturally a big favor of us, which we have the manual sometimes, is the PSL, PSA, problem statement language, problem statement analyzer, which is to our knowledge, the first meta tool, a mother of all language workbenches, if you like to use that word, from the end of 70s.
Okay, so I will go back and study it now. I'm curious.
Yeah.
And okay, so we have talked about tools, and now I think it would be interesting to talk about how we create DSLs. So you already said something in your introduction, but it would be nice to recap. So how is the typical DSL created? So who designed the language, and how the language designer learn about the domain that is for which is creating a language?
Yeah, a good question, because that's what we have been trying to also understand. Well, in our cases, typically the language engineer does not need to learn the domain because he or she already knows about it.
Okay.
Because we provide a tooling, and customers who already know their domain formalize it into a language.
Okay.
We need to learn customer domain, but that is based on our experience that we learn, let's say, automotive regenerative braking systems. That's more harder for us than for them to build a language.
Okay.
We have tried to make the language creation easy, so that if they already know the domain, they can formulate the language, define the meta model, what we say. And of course, while you are creating the language, you obviously don't know all the details, but you have the big picture clear. And once you formulate the language, also the little smaller issues become formalized at the time. And many years ago, we wrote a book with one of my colleagues with Stephen Kelly on domain-specific languages, and we analyzed their 20-30 customer cases and interviewed them just to find out how they formulated the languages, like where they find the language concepts. And we found 5 different kind of categories where in these cases the languages came. So sometimes there was already an established vocabulary, and that's taken. Sometimes it was mimicked from the user interface concepts. So all the widgets that you can see basically come your language concepts. Sometimes it's the output. So you have a certain kind of structure that you generate. So you almost take the output structure and put that into language, which does not necessarily raise the abstraction, but that's what some people. You have an XML or config file, and you take all the items from the config file into your language.
Okay, so
then there's a product line approach that you basically look the variation, that all the aspects that vary in a product, they become the language concepts. And then the last approach is from the physical structure, like if you have a railway system, fish farms, where the physical location and look and feel has importance, then that is. I can provide a link to the article that
sure.
will provide maybe some details for the listeners or readers.
Yeah, I think it will be very interesting to understand which mental schemas the language designer can start from to creating the language. Because in the project we at Strumenta follow, we are typically building DSLs for the clients, so we'll need to learn the domain. While it seems that in your case it's people with experience with the domain that build the language. So I'm curious if they now need to learn language design principle, or it's something that they really can get easily by doing it.
Yeah, well, obviously creating languages is something that requires abstraction capabilities, and and not all people like to do that perhaps, but typically architects or framework developers in the companies already are thinking in these terms. So they already have this kind of way of thinking. Let's have a reusable parts. Let's not write everything mentality. And those kind of people, lead developers, chief architects, they are normally the people who define the language.
Okay, good. And let's try to describe what is the experience of creating a DSLs with MetaEdit Plus, and in particular, what kind of effort does it take to create a new language, and how long does it take typically? I know that different languages can take a different effort, but to give a general idea.
We typically ask this information, but quite often companies who build it internally, they don't collect the data. So they don't measure directly the effort. But some companies do, and last year we published a paper which is freely available. I can provide a link where we looked 10 cases. So companies like Panasonic, Porsche, Polar, and others, and it was an average 10 days, 10 working days.
Nice.
And that means a language and a generator. So obviously, if there is multiple generators that you want to generate also tests or configurations or documentation, then that's an additional effort. But we look cases where we can easily ask from the customer that you build one language and one generator, and what was about the effort.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And it's surprisingly small. Many people are a little bit surprised that it's not a man-year effort.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said, that sometimes the clients do not collect the data, and given you're saying that your clients can build the languages by themselves, I guess that sometimes it must be hard to get information on their experience, especially if things are going smoothly, they don't run into problems, so maybe you don't hear from them.
Yes. But in vast majority of the cases, customers build the languages by themselves, and they always maintain them by themselves in maybe 95% of cases. So we only are involved if they have any questions on how to do certain things, or if they sometimes even ask for advice that there are different options that what they should pick. But usually companies don't want to share their language definitions to outside. That's a little bit hard for all the people in marketing domain-specific languages or wanting to show them, because companies feel that they are their important asset that they don't want to distribute. So at best we can show maybe some screenshots what they look like. And with their permission, then we'll show portion of their languages.
Yeah, I think this is a major problem for marketing because sometimes companies think it's such a competitive advantage to have a DSLs that maybe they don't want other competitors to know they're using a DSL. So that's makes our life difficult.
That's difficult, I have to say, unfortunately, but that's how it goes.
We should build worse DSLs so they are happy to share them. But and what can you tell us about maintaining these DSLs? We have said that it takes more or less 10 days to build them. Then, of course, it depends on the scope of the DSLs, the number of generators. But do you have any idea about the effort of maintaining these DSLs?
That's something what we have less studied, because usually when customers are starting to use it, then they are not anymore actively involved with us. So we don't know that so much in detail, but it should not be large. We have some customers who have close to 400 language users, but they can still be 1 or 2 persons who are working to maintain the languages, and not necessarily their full-time work. And usually they are always the same persons who are also using the language.
Okay.
So they might be the product development team, and then if the teams require new capabilities, then they extend the language.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how people learn how to use your tool? Do you provide some training, or you give them documentation?
We have a bunch of material, videos, detailed manuals, a book, articles, but most people do it by downloading the evaluation version, and we have there a few tutorials that will teach them how to do simple languages first. And then the evaluation version is full of examples with flow-driven languages, state machine-driven languages, data modeling languages, hardware modeling languages. So maybe many people pick an existing one and then they change it for they need approach.
Good, makes sense.
And I should say one thing that makes the maintenance easy in our tooling, because it's a lesson that we learned maybe in hard times, that in the beginning when we built the tool, we call it MetaEdit. It was the first graphical metamodeling tool, but it had the unwanted feature that when you change the language definition, you quite often also lose your all models done.
Okay.
So involved, you need to maintain manually or write the programs to translate the models to the new meta model. And that is still the same practice many generative tools like Microsoft DSL tools or Eclipse modeling framework GMF is using. So usually you lose your work if you change the meta. So we changed the method so that the architecture, which we think is a unique, at least when we built it, was that whatever language engineer makes and change the meta model, the existing work is not lost. It will migrate automatically. So there is no effort goes to maintaining existing models. Let's say you have 300 users and you change the language, and you might be afraid that what will happen to the work of 300 people.
Yeah.
So we guarantee with the tool that editors won't break, they work, and they can still see the models. And if they have something that they need to update, they can see them in a screaming red or whatever the language engineer wants to show to be migrated. And that makes the evolution possible, and also the maintenance portion to be very small, because always the models update automatically in a non-destructive manner.
Okay, yeah, that seems a very important point, because it permits to evolve the language. It doesn't, discourage you.
And domain-specific languages always evolve because the domain evolves. We have new generation needs and things like that. So we think that is very, very crucial.
Okay. And another thing I wanted to ask about the typical usage of DSLs is with MetaEdit Plus. Do you see users building just one DSLs or typically families of DSLs that can maybe interoperate, to define different aspects of the same system?
Yeah. In our case, it is a good question. What is a language? Like people could ask from, let's say, from SysML or UML, is it a language or is it a collection of sub-languages like a state machine or class diagram and things like that? In our case, we are a little bit like this UML way of thinking, that you can have a domain-specific language where you have one portion of the language focus of the hardware, physical structures, and then the other may be state machines on the behavior of the physical structure. So you have actually two connected languages. Quite often, most cases, we don't have a data and would be interesting to study, but usually there are 2-3 sub-languages, and their size is smallest are maybe 50 concepts, 50 keywords. In our terminology, in UML is next to 300 maybe in our language definition. So they are 1/5, 1/6 of the size of the UML, the smallest. And then the largest are maybe close to 800 language. They could be 2-3 times size of the UML. So there's a very big difference depending on the domain.
Okay, but it's good to have the possibility to compare it with something known to many users as UML, because it gives you...
They always tend to be smaller in the UML because they don't need to carry big things with them. They can be focused, but then they may have a more type of users, let's say not just programmers, but there could be also, let's say, test engineers or safety engineers who also want to use the models, but for something else than for code generation.
Yeah, good. And I mean, as a DSL enthusiast, and after we've discussed all the advantages, I sometimes wonder why not everyone is using DSLs, right? Seems a bit a waste. But in your experience, what are the main barriers that prevent people to adopt DSLs? Why they are not using DSLs?
Yeah, I think two main reasons. One is that in order to build a DSL, you need to have experts' time.
Okay.
And quite often the expert is the person who everybody is already knocking and asking. And that's also the person that the boss or managers who are giving resources don't necessarily want to do something which don't give immediate benefits for product development. So it requires normally the managers to see that we need to invest in software development. So that's number one, experts' time. And number two is that in many software development and system development, more in the software side, we don't have a repetition enough that it makes sense to build DSLs. So if we are a company in a project business, building something for customer A this week and next week to customer B, expertise on JavaScript or whatever, it's hard then to invest on something that makes you faster.
Yeah.
But let's say if you are building printers or cars or whatever products, you know that you are most likely building them next year too. So the mentality of the companies is totally different, that it makes sense for them to invest in making the products faster next year and years to come.
Good.
So those are the two things that keep things or make the barrier.
Yeah, and this is also connected to the next question that I wanted to ask is what kind of organization, in your opinion, benefit more from DSLs? Are product-based companies, maybe?
Correct.
Yeah. And do you think other characteristics are important for an
I think,
organization?
yeah, we have also customers who are project houses, but they have already focused their business so that they are doing projects with a certain technology in a certain way, and they don't want to do others. So they already have an automation, and then they can build the systems faster for that
Uh,
niche market that they are working with, and that way be competitive. So repetition is a key thing. If you can press the generate button multiple times on your models, the more you can do it, the better it is. So if you have a company which have, let's say, 3 or more software variants, then like a product line, then this approach is perfect. Another thing that we often hear is also that companies say that they want the non-programmers to be involved. So the customers need to be involved, or other stakeholders like test engineers, deployment people, safety engineers, they need to be involved in the development better, and having a language that raises abstraction is the way to build everything into the same table.
Yeah, and this is also connected to my next question. It was what are the typical who are the typical users of ADSLs? Are they developers? Are they, I don't know, accountants? Are they?
They are developers, but they are not necessarily all programmers by background. So they can be mechatronic engineers, control engineers, test engineers, safety engineers, insurance experts, user interaction specialists, kind of people. So I would say kind of engineer, but not necessarily computer science background people.
And another question that I had for a long time and is more related to marketing is how companies find out about DSLs, because sometimes I think some companies maybe have the idea they need some way to automatize the development to reduce the repetition, but they really don't know that DSLs exist. So maybe after years of looking, they find an article, but
Yeah.
it's hard for them to know how the DSLs exist. So in your experience, how people find about DSLs, how people find out about your company?
I think there's no single answer there. In some cases, there are movements in the industry to create languages or meta models or formalize them. Let's say in automotive area, there has been approaches like AutoSAR in Europe or JASPAR in Asia or AADL in US, where companies realize that multiple companies realize and get together that let's build something concrete. The same happens in railway systems with RailML or telecom systems with CPL and other standards. So that's one way. The industry itself realizes that we can't do everything based on PNF of a C language kind of thing. We need to have abstractions better. And then normally there are visionary customers who basically see that they can get competitive advantage over the competitors if they automate their development compared to others who do it in a traditional manual way. But the problem for marketing of DSLs is that people are not aware. It's not such a word that everybody could immediately apply that, yes, this is the market we are in. But if it's in a market like AutoSAR or RailML or something like that, then the people in the railway business realize that, oh, this is what we are actually doing. And it's sometimes funny because you may have implemented almost the same kind of language for one customer in a certain industry, let's say in a medical, and then you have industry automation in chemical processes who never speak with each other, but actually the same kind of meta model pretty much solves their problems too. But they never to discuss with each other, and they never think that they are in the same market. Yeah, so sometimes it's surprising.
It's difficult to see this connection from outside.
Yeah.
And can we talk now a little more about MetaCase? So can you tell us more about your company?
Yeah, well, I already in the beginning shortly mentioned that we are basically background from the university research, 10 people studying this and founding the company and working to build the languages. We built first something what we call MetaID, the first graphical meta modeling tool, and then it has we learned that it has several limitations, like if you change the language, your models break, kind of thing. You could only support one user at a time, quite small models, one language at a time, and all that, these kind of limitations. And then we realized that, the proper way would be to build the tooling so that it enables evolution, multiple languages, large models like million of model elements, multiple users, different views, not just graphical, but also other formats. And then we built this current tooling, what we call MetaID Plus. And so our background comes from the basic research, and that's how we then founded the company, to see the opportunity that this is something what we would like to do also after the academic life. And for me personally, having done a PhD thesis on the meta part, it was easy for me to go to the business side, because I enjoyed more seeing customers to building languages faster and building their products faster than getting an article published.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's my joy. I like more to improve the productivity and see something like that. Of course, I like writing the papers, but if I need to do the choice, then I decided to step outside from the academic world. Yeah. I still like it and I'm still involved, but doing is maybe more for me than studying or research.
I fully agree. I also like to write papers from time to time, but working on a real project for me is more satisfying. And about Joy, I wanted to ask what project do you like the most working on? If there is any specific project or any type of project that gives you more satisfaction?
I guess I'm in a position where every engineer is, that the best project is where a customer has quite good understanding what they want. But really the joy of this work is that being able to see so many different companies and how they build software. Like if you are in a pacemaker manufacturer, or if you are chemical process plant, or a web application or mobile application, and how things are built so different ways. So that's some very interesting to see, and also how our whole industry has get more diversity into it. So it's even more richer and different ways to build the software than it was, let's say, 25 years ago. So that's maybe the nicest part of this work.
Yeah, we're in an interesting field. We are really seeing things changing, and that's.
I think we should really appreciate all the people in software and systems area to really enjoy. That is an interesting time, interesting period is going on and has been going on for a long time.
Yeah. And okay, and can you tell us more about the, let's say, the customer journey of your customers? So they typically go and download the evaluation version of MetaEdit Plus, they play with it, and if they have problems, they contact you, right? Otherwise, they just use it, follow the tutorials, build their languages, and start benefit from it.
Yeah, correct. The tool is available to download from metacase.com, and people then do that and try it out. And we have tried to pack their multiple tutorials so they can do everything by themselves. And then typically then they contact us by email directly, and some people put to the forum public questions. But this is also the interesting part in DSLs, that they don't want to put necessarily their questions to the public forum about their language. They just want to ask directly from us how to do that. So that's maybe the common thing. Then if companies want to get to the fast track, so they want to have their first language next week kind of thing ready, then they contact us, and we provide a consulting for them. So we sit together and build first version of the language for them in a couple of days. It won't be immediately ready, but it will be enough, covering maybe 20% or half, so they can try it out and see whether it makes sense to continue to the end and implement the rest. And usually at this point of time, then also the management gets involved, and they see that, can we also produce tests? Can we also do that? Can we extend the language and so forth? So they really see this kind of power. And what we want to show is that the investment is small, and then it starts to pay back very, very quickly. So that's the two options we basically have. And then some customers also say that we are so busy, we don't have time, we need to have this, can you build it for us? Which is the more or less the consulting kind of business. But typically most customers want to build them by themselves.
But does it happen that these companies that are too busy and they ask you to build the language for yourself, then they fail to give you assistance and to give you access to the domain experts to help you build in the language?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I mean, when there are these companies that are too busy and they do not have the time to build the languages, does it happen that they also do not have the time of the domain experts to sit with you to help you design the language because they are too busy, so they don't give you proper support for...
Understand. Sometimes companies do want to use the time for specifying, so they want to formulate what the language look like, what are some of the constraints or symbols and things like that, and they say implement this like a concept visualization rules, and here it is implemented. But one thing that I think is crucial for domain-specific languages is not just the concrete syntax and abstract syntax and constraints, just the language definition, but it is the overall use process and, let's say, how to reuse the models. If I make a model, is it something that another person can refer to, and how that is done, and how the models are checked together, and how to translate those models to some analysis or simulation tool or things like that, so that the development process is fluent. Like I want to press a button after making my designs, it checks it, it generates the code, it sends the data to the simulator, it reads the results from the simulator and produces a document saying how it went. So how to automate those kind of flows that everything goes fluently. And often the companies doing this manually, copying things from one place to another in a file, they don't necessarily always realize that how much things could be automated when they get used to certain manual practices. And it is also often so that when they are busy, we can build a generator, but we can only build a generator if company can say what kind of output they want to generate.
Yes.
And it's hard for us to invent that. But that's a crucial piece to be involved by them, that best programmer or whatever is the output, that should be somehow involved and saying that this is exactly what we want to generate and why. Okay. And when people are writing the code manually, people always have their own preferences, how things should be done. and then it could be that they need to decide first internally what is a good thing to be generated, what is a good looking code, or what are the good patterns and things like that. So that's what their expertise is needed. And I should also say here and emphasize that when we build a generator, we always build a generator so that it produces exactly like they are doing it manually today.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of engineers, maybe majority of the engineers, who say, no, I don't want to use a code generator because I have been using some UML tool and it generates skeleton awful code. I can't maintain it. And it's of course natural because the company making let's say the UML tool, it's impossible for them to know how the code should look like and how it should integrate with the existing legacy code. But if the company itself is making a generator, then we can produce exactly like they are doing it, or they would like to do it in the future.
So you can have also domain-specific code generation in a way.
Correct. And some customers have also measured this, that they have maybe doubts that will the generated code be efficient. So then they have compared these, and then if they can see that, this piece of code is not efficient, if they can tell what is the efficient, then we can change the generator. Yeah. And then nobody anymore needs to know that, how to write this particle point. It always goes the same way. So that's really the luxury of this, that it gets automated.
Okay. And I wanted also to ask, do users ask you a web version of MetaEdit Plus? Because this is something we have seen with other language workbenches. Sometimes users are happy with the desktop application. Sometimes they ask, is it possible to have an editor running on the web?
Yeah. Well, indeed, it's a one trend. Maybe the usability aspect is not particularly good in these web tools when the size of the model gets larger and performance and so forth. But even today, if customer wants to put this into a web, well, sure, they can use cloud services and put it running in a server and access it with remote over the web easily. So that's not really the problem. And then they still have the familiar desktop capabilities in use, which is normally, at least today, it's superior to what browser-based can provide in terms of speeding and moving things in a graphical models, for example, and things like that.
Yeah, good. And another thing that is specific to MetaEdit Plus, I wanted to ask if sometimes companies are worried by the fact that the tool is closed source, or maybe instead they are happy because there is someone maintaining it. So how does it compare to other language workbenches that are instead open source?
Well, I personally have not yet met a company who said that they don't buy a tool because it's a proprietary or closed. Or company may say that in the public, but then they actually do things different in practice. But interestingly, I have met and made contracts with companies who say that they don't want to have open source tools.
Huh, interesting.
That's interesting. And sometimes it's also challenging for us because we provide open source extensions and plugins to Eclipse and Visual Studio and so forth. But I guess one thing is that many companies want that if they have a problem, they want that it will be solved by a company who masters the technology. So if it is built on top of open source stack, then it's really hard for people to ensure that, well, it continues to work next year for sure too. And that's the challenge. But that's the path we have been taking 20 years ago, and that's the path that we currently continue. Of course, I do understand that companies have the doubt that, okay, if it's a closed tool, what will happen? And then I think two issues are important. One is that all language workbenches have the common factor is that if something happens to the language workbench, whatever that is, you should be able to translate your existing work to any other format.
Okay, true.
Even the formats we don't know yet. So whatever happens, let's say in our case for us, well, you have a work meta-edit, you can make a generator that puts it to CDIF, XMI, whatever format you prefer, if that's the. And then they realized, and then the manager maybe asked that from the programmer, is this the case? And the programmer says, yeah, we can translate the model, whatever. And then this isn't anymore such an issue. But then if the company is required, then a common practice has been to have an escrow agreement. It could be that if we decide to stop business or we go even bankrupt or something like that, then they still can continue using the licenses. Or even maybe they get the source code for the tool. So it's just a contract. So then it's not anymore closed. But many companies don't want to get the source code. They just want it that runs and continues to work, because most companies are not in a tool business.
Yeah. So
and that's normally the way to solve this kind of doubt.
Good answer. The escrow, I think it's a very good solution for most companies that can be worried, given that they depend so much on the tool you provide, right? So
yes,
if it becomes a crucial part of their business, they need
Indeed.
to think about all possibilities. Okay.
The nice part in language workbench is that they're never closed. They never close any doors, because you can always take your stuff from there if you want. So once the companies realize this, then the typical issues that, it's now somehow locked into this tool and we can't do anything else than using this tool, that's not applied to tools like meta-edit Plus.
Good. Now I'm taking a lot of your time, so maybe I will skip a couple of questions and go to the conclusions, because I think it's been a very interesting chat, but I don't want to to steal all your day. So I wanted to ask if you see any interesting trend in the DSL world. If you have seen recently something new or something that is changing, or
we see many trends, many small trends maybe, because more and more domain-specific languages are developed. At our company side, we maybe published 200 of domain-specific languages already built with meta-edit. So what we see is that languages are built into more and more different domains, and maybe among the trends is the collaboration, maybe the web portion that you mentioned. But in terms of meta-edit, meta is a multi-user tool where multiple people edit the same diagram at the same time. So it's already providing collaboration in a continuous manner compared to classical IDE kind of tools. And then also managing the models, the results of using DSL, that if the people are not programmers, they don't necessarily want to use kits and things like that. So how to make that collaboration easy for them, and also have some kind of governance, like some people are not allowed to change the models, but they can only reuse it from the other DSL, from the existing models. So these are the things that we see customers requiring more.
Good. And so I think this also it's related to the next question. So was wondering if there is anything that you're working on for future version of MetaEdit.
What I'm working currently for future is that I work with 3 language engineering cases in my hand, with milestones coming a little busy. But in terms of MetaEdit product development, I guess improving the expressiveness of the language is the meta stuff is the big thing. I'm not in person involved anymore in developing the tooling, so others have been doing it. But that's the better language engineering capabilities, better model management capabilities, performance. That are the type of things we are looking to provide in the next versions of MetaEdit Plus. But we really listen to the customers what they want, because we don't do it for research, but we do it for providing tooling for what the language engineers and customers prefer. So it pretty much comes from the users.
Okay. And finally, I wanted to ask you, if someone wants to find more about you, your work, and your tool, where they should look.
I think our company website, the metacase.com, is perhaps the single point, because it points to the articles and videos and tutorials and trying out MetaEdit Plus if you prefer. But if you are looking for other contacts, I think people, whatever listeners or readers might be interested, is that perhaps already in your domain there is some person already creating a DSLs for that area. So maybe they have some ideas, performance modeling or testing or whatever, testing DSLs. Follow those people and look what they have been doing and what have been the results. And of course, you are welcome to try our technology as well.
Good. Okay, so this, maybe one final question could be, do you have anything else to add? Anything that we forgot to discuss about?
I would like to, one thing I would like to maybe say is that I personally have not seen any other technique comparable for domain-specific modeling languages to bring 5 to 10 times productivity improvements. So that's why I think listeners or readers should consider domain-specific languages. And if they have found out other techniques that provide similar results, please let me know.
Yeah, I would be also curious to find them out. Okay, so I would like to thank you a lot to spend all these times with us and providing your unique experience. For me, someone that loves DSL, was very interesting to discuss with someone that has built and seen a lot of DSLs over the years, and I learn a lot. So I hope that also listener readers can benefit from it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure and interesting questions.
Thank you. So talk to you soon. Bye.
Yeah. I